Let's go visit the Talus Dome. Edmonton is where we call home. Troy lives in Hazeldean. His street is lined with very old trees, very old trees. Basket of YEGs. It's a basket of YEGs. Municipal politics in the city of champions. Gonna crack the egg wide open. Gonna be excellent. It's a basket of YEGs in the city of Edmonton right now.
Welcome back to the Basket of YEGs Podcast, and after a long hiatus, we're back. After 4 months, a quarter of a year of radio silence, we're back, and I'm joined with two wonderful individuals here with me today to talk about the last week or so of City Council events. I've got with me the past president of the Strathcona Centre Community League, and he's the creator of the online magazine, The Edmonton Quotient, Jeff Samsonow. How are you doing today, Jeff?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. And sitting across from me, I've also got Millie. He's the civics director of the Alberta Ave Community League, and he likes to get right into the muck in civic politics. And he was there with me for a couple of the committee meetings this week, so we'll have fun talking about it. How are you doing today, Adam?
I'm doing pretty good. I kept the truck out of the ditch, but I do like going right for the mud. So, it helps when you can throw the mud in all directions. That's what a good mudslinger would do.
So, getting into it, there was a really busy week at City Council this week, and one that was very interesting for myself. And I think where we'd like to start is the flags. So this week, the City of Edmonton, after Don Iveson back in, it was a few months ago, put together a motion to study the City of Edmonton's flag design. They decided this week at committee to not pursue any moving forward with the flag, and instead raise the Treaty 6 flag and the Métis flag alongside the City of Edmonton one. Jeff, what did you think about this? I know you had some comments as it was happening.
I may have been once this sort of started, in the same camp of people not realizing the city had a flag. And I know that was one of the results of some surveying. The city does have a flag. I think it's fine. I don't mind the design that was kind of floated as a replacement design. I think it definitely incorporated some elements of Edmonton and reconciliation. But I think this was, as it sort of ended up being, kind of not really a story and not really a thing to be working on. And I think, if it ever comes up again, they'll probably just pass the new flag, or maybe they'll have a contest and it'll build some buzz. But I think we saw with this one that it wasn't an issue that people really seemed all that interested in.
So you're right. And that makes me mad, unfortunately. I'm a huge nut about flag design. Flags were very important to me. And my girlfriend, I mentioned her at the start of the week when this came up. I'm like, hey, they're debating the new flag. Are you excited? And she's like, no, why would anyone care about that? And then I sat her down and I made her watch Roman Mars's TED Talk on flag design. And after that, she came out of it like super stoked about the idea of redesigning a flag. Have you seen the TED Talk?
I have not, but I have seen people such as yourself sharing the video whenever the idea of the Edmonton flag comes up. I get why it could be important, and I'm sure there are great reasons to have one, and I think it's great that we do have one. I think there's, importance, there's history there, and I think that all makes sense. I'm not surprised that people maybe didn't get excited.
Here's a question that I had, and Brian Anderson brought it up in the City Council meeting, where when it was proposed that we would raise the Treaty 6 and the Métis flag alongside the City of Edmonton's, well, inclusivity isn't really the accomplishment we've accomplished right there. For example, if a Ukrainian or Somali American, they don't feel very included when they see those three different flags flying, whereas if we had a City of Edmonton flag. Now, I'm not trying to get all lives matter on this, and I'm walking that fine line.
That sounds like where that idea is going out.
Yeah, I don't quite like where you're going with this.
We had a flag design, and we had the opportunity to include everyone in Edmonton in a new flag design and a new flag process, and we opted to say that inclusivity of everyone isn't what's important to Edmonton right now. That was the message that I took away from that.
I think they put way too much thought into this. Like, they should have just replaced the flag. The old flag is obviously terrible. It obviously, it's not well designed. It evokes a whole bunch of colonialism, and it's beyond not being inclusive. It's kind of offensive. And they should have just replaced it with the one that was proposed with the river, and instead they went about doing it doing a whole bunch of consultation on something and put a bunch of time and energy into something that they should have just made the decision of and replaced. Like, literally run it up the flagpole instead of making us all talk about it.
And I think you could have replaced it and most people, again, wouldn't have even noticed, I suppose. Or, you know what, set aside some of your marketing dollars to do a flag contest, because at least then people might get more interested, excited. But just going to the inclusivity item of it, one, I don't think you have to include kind of everybody of all walks of life. I think, you know, including people who were here before all of us white folks probably makes sense, and it's certainly a step towards reconciliation. But something we did in Strathcona, we were doing a mural on our hall, which I'm a super big fan of. I really love it. Every time I walk by, I'm proud that it's there. And it incorporates the history of the neighborhood. So you have some of those historic buildings from Old Strathcona, but we also have the Buffalo Run, you know, which was sort of a part of that neighborhood well back when, and some great Indigenous sort of imagery. But there's also colors which represent some of the neighborhood's history and more modern history. So German. So there's some German flag colors and some other like nationalities mixed into that design. So the mural incorporates those colors. So I think there's ways of doing it in a flag which could incorporate some of those wider Edmonton ones. But of course, with Edmonton or a city, you could have 100 flags.
I was going to say that this is probably an issue for a maximum of 100 people. And I know that this is, you know, a nerd thing, but they committed to, you know, they committed to a year of reconciliation, and they haven't followed through with one of the tangible material things that they could have done. I don't fully understand why they didn't just replace the flag and instead made us go through all of this.
I mean, the irony of your statements is that was one of the questions on the survey is, how would you feel about, you know, us just hiring a designer to replace the flag? And half people said, yeah, okay. And the other half said, no, absolutely not. And in the survey result, they're like, well, should we even redesign the flag? And half said, yep. And the other half said, no. So it's an interesting split where I think no matter what happens, we'd have people angry about it. I think the only conclusively agreed upon point is no one wants to spend money or time on this, which, you know, makes me upset, but it is what it is. Maybe we'll come back to the flags, another council.
Or I wouldn't be surprised in the next council, right? It's 4 years. I mean, I think that's a lot of time to talk about something like that.
And it's an easy win for whoever catches this football. All they got to do is, you know, get a flag printed, and there's a single flag pole where it gets flown. So
the homework for the listeners on this is to go watch Roman Mars' TED Talk. I'll have a link in the show notes for this episode. You can't watch that TED Talk and not come out of it excited about municipal flag design. I'll leave it at that, but watch the TED Talk. I think we'll move on to another big issue, and this one, for those that have followed me, you'll know this is a huge issue to me. The security at City Hall was debated this week. City Council, they opted to let administration run wild and catch the hot potato and do whatever they want with security. But the motion that was put forward was to potentially implement a pony wall separating City Council from the rest of the gallery, as well as metal detectors and bag searches at the doors of City Hall. Adam, you share a lot of my views on this. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Initially, so I do have a conflict on this somewhat, in that I see that the city clearly has an obligation to their employees under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. 2.1 clearly articulates that they have to do everything that's reasonably practicable to ensure the safety of their employees. So they have this legal obligation. However, City Council is special. Like, these guys and Bev Esslinger are supposed to be people of the people. Like, they go out, they knock doors, they spend hours and hours and hours at functions, shaking hands and kissing babies. And to suggest that they're afraid of cab drivers seems a little bit bizarre.
And I mean, I don't even know that suggestion was made, because throughout the process, I was trying to get a suggestion of exactly what City Council and or administration were afraid of. And that was the thing that became clear, is there's no goonie in this situation.
It's an existential threat.
Well, that one, the cab motion, which, I mean, it was sort of, I guess, a bit of an unruly kind of a hearing. And I mean, that was the one where it was kind of, don't want to make light of their issues, but some of them took their shirts off and were waving their shirts around. It was a little bit humorous to look at. But that one did come up in some of the administrations. I mean, some of it's, redacted and not available, but some of the supporting documentation that people can see when they go look at the minutes and the agendas of the meetings. That one was mentioned, that meeting. And, it's unfortunate that that's the one that keeps getting mentioned because, most of the people in that room were people of color, which doesn't put this in a great light. And neither does, and you guys would have heard this, and I certainly saw some journalists quoting some of these things, mental health kept getting mentioned as well. And it's like, these things are not building a great case, of inclusivity. Talk about that again, where one example, the only example locally in City Hall they used is a room full of people of color. And then there's continual references from administration and some counselors about people with mental health issues, which is just a huge stigma. To be throwing that around is why you need all this security.
I was just going to say, the city has in-house, if they're worried about men taking off their shirts, I'm sure they could have brought in some lifeguards who deal with that all day long. But instead, again, we're arguing about a silly wall that, this is a solution looking for a problem.
But Troy, you mentioned, some of these reasons that were thrown out, and the ones that did get mentioned and the ones that are in the report that can be seen are not stuff that happened at City Hall, not necessarily even in Edmonton.
My favorite is number 2, which was when George Bush was talking to reporters in a country he declared war on. One of them threw a shoe at him, and that's why we need a wall in City Hall. The other one that got me, there was a meeting in Montreal of, I believe it was a school board, and that was cited in the report as there was some unruly members. No, nothing was harmed, but they used that as justification for their measures. Montreal doesn't have bag searches, metal detectors. So even the report where they had their justifications from similar Canadian cities, it didn't map one-to-one. It seemed like here is a list of things that happened in an irrelevant situation, and here's what we want to do, completely separate. That was one of the things that bothered me. But what I'd like to talk about even more is, sure, there was the implementation and these issues, but the other part of this was council didn't seem to want to make a decision on this. And the end result was they moved to not make a decision at all and let administration choose for them. What do you guys make of that?
Well, from community to league standpoints, I'm sure, and I'm not here speaking on behalf of the league. I'm here in my capacity as a publisher of Edmonton Quotient. I'm sure there are a lot of people in community leagues or other neighbors who have spoken to many zoning issues where council has gone against administration's recommendations. So I'm sure they'd love to see that go more often of these decisions where council would say, well, we trust administration to make the right call. So they're definitely willing to go against administration or on their own when it suits them.
Looking at my read of the play is simply just that they need to comply with the Occupational Health and Safety Act and realize that it is politically incorrect for them to do so. So they're stuck between being forced to comply and realizing that might actually be something that could turn up voters in October. So they're stuck, and that's why they had to send it back to administration, because they had to make a decision. And they're correct in saying that it could have been taken by administration, but I think this has to do with the Safety Act.
I wonder if that's actually the case, though, because, yes, you're correct about the law and their requirement to do so. In the consultation they did privately with city staff, 17% of city staff said that they had ever felt unsafe at a city council meeting. And the reason they cited was they had their back to the audience. And that strikes me as a furniture problem. If you're unsafe with your back to the audience, then don't sit there. Move them to the side. There's so many other alternatives that could have been proposed, and none of them were on the table as options, and none of them were debated at all, which makes me leery of your assertion that this is purely about the safety of employees.
Well, I was going to say both that and one of the examples that came up, I think, in just the discussions of it was the workers' compensation hostage taking, right? Was an example of something scary that happened in the world or in Edmonton, then that's what we have to protect against at City Hall. But going to the employee thing, which I think that speaks to, but even that idea, okay, but they're not talking about protecting employees of the city or City Hall. They're simply talking about increased security around the meetings and the meeting rooms. So anybody can still walk into City Hall, this sort of mythical, really scary person that we're now expecting at all city functions. That person can still walk into City Hall, can still go to offices, can still go to public functions in the atrium and everything there. So that's where I think the safety of employees argument wasn't made. I mean, there's definitely, when 17 or 20% of people feeling they were unsafe at some point, that's something to think about. And there are maybe things to do, whether it is design of different rooms, as you mentioned, Joy, or some other things. But I don't think that's the case here. And I think that was my biggest issue with this whole debate was there didn't seem to be a reason for it. And there don't seem to be any examples of what people are worried about. And it doesn't seem to actually protect them outside of the 2 or 3 hours or the day of the meeting in the meeting room itself. So I wasn't really sure, why this became such an issue. And then to sort of just pass it back to administration to do what they want seemed like a weird ending to it.
I was going to say that the behavior in the peanut gallery, and I'm a member of the peanut gallery, I sit there and sit at the back of the room and tweet and, cause some trouble. But our behavior is probably better than, the Catholic School Board, for instance. It's when you see the governance examples in Edmonton.
And that's trustee to trustee.
You're
trustee
talking about to trustee is worse behaved than the full-out peanut gallery full of crazies at Edmonton City Council. But we don't see a wall going up between the Catholic School Board trustees. We see a wall going up to keep the peanut gallery away. I don't understand it.
Maybe if it wasn't an election year, the education minister would have to do that. Yeah, I just don't see, and that was sort of the weakest part of this in the administration's report or the security report, and then in the discussions, it didn't seem like there was anything other than the world is a scary place, and we should be scared.
Even more to that, the report was one thing, and I assumed, there were some redacted sections, and maybe there was some things we weren't privy to, whatever, I'll let that go. But at the actual meeting, there was one choice quote from executive committee where the city staffer said, random acts of violence are just a reality of the world we live in. And some of the councillors paused and were like, well, no, they're not. Crime is down across the board. And they justified it, well, property crime has increased. But there's no property crime in city council chambers. It seemed like not only were they lacking the justification for these measures, but they were also lacking the reason. Like, what are these measures put in place to do? Is it to prevent someone from vandalizing City Hall, or is it to protect the councillors or the staff? I don't know. The whole thing, it seemed like administration was floundering because they got caught in, I don't want to say a lie, but this was supposed to be secret. They were in the initial report that went in private to City Council, it was, we're doing this, just a heads up, thanks. And then council got it. It got leaked and the whole conversation started. But metal detectors and bag searches were supposed to be a done deal. And it feels like administration got caught with their pants down when someone asked them why. They're not going to ask them why anymore because council has opted to let them make the entire decision.
Well, and that's the other thing, which it could be disappointing, if they decide to move ahead with things that it probably won't be this council, but the next one in October, if they don't like what's happening, they still have say over things around their meetings and stuff. So you could see that stuff change. It's just a weird decision. And I think, when it was a decision that didn't get really made, I think that was kind of like, that became an issue because they're going to have say at some point again, right? If the next steps are that administration wants to put in way more than what we've heard about, because there's a long list. There's like a 70-point security plan that's sort of floated that we haven't seen any of or most of, right? So who knows what it could look like.
Moving on, one of the things that was approved last year in April was the mezzo against administration's best judgment, and we got its brother this week, the Southpark on Whyte development just across the street. Jeff, you past president of Strathcona, you probably have a lot of thoughts on this. What was your reaction as past president to this?
Well, again, not really speaking on behalf of the league, but our current president, was quoted in a number of news stories on this, saying it's not necessarily something that the neighborhood was after, and certainly goes against the current zoning and bylaws of the neighborhood, which also include, the mature neighborhood overlay, and we have the Strathcona area redevelopment plan, a specific kind of zoning for that area because of the history of the neighborhood. So it was certainly not something that was sought. And people are not super happy about that because the big reason that will get thrown around will be the height. There's a couple of towers on it that could go up to
I believe it's 20 stories.
It's going to be close to 20. Yeah, we'll see where that ends. I know a couple of the taller buildings now we're seeing these little like kind of bumps go on the top, so it'll end up probably being definitely 20 stories in height. And around Whyte, right now the zoning is for 4, so it's definitely much taller. There are a few buildings that are taller than that. The hotels, I believe, are 8 or 6 and 8 to 10. The Garneau, that block is about 7.5, 8 stories. So it's not going to super stand out, but it will stand out for quite a while because there's not a lot of other towers going up. And the interesting thing about this, and it sort of happened last year with the Mezzo as well, is, okay, so we have this rule around Whyte Avenue and Old Strathcona. This is how tall we want to build things. Okay, 4 stories. Probably needs to change in today's world where we need to go with some density and some, get some redevelopment happening that could bring in great new businesses and bring more people to these areas. But 16, which was the Mezzo, and this one, which could be up to 20, is well outside the scope. And at the same time, the city is re-examining the rules around Whyte Avenue and Strathcona with something called Plan Whyte, which last week we sort of saw where that might end up. And it may say, okay, the historic blocks that are sort of provincially protected to some degree, we're going to keep that at 4. But on Whyte Avenue, let's go to 6. But then there's this other area, which hilariously on the map is just where the Mezzo and Southpark are. And across from the Mezzo, across from the keg there, the old Scona parking lot, which the city is selling. Those are the only spots that are in a different color where they can go much taller, which is kind of interesting. So you're going to have this new plan, which has to kind of incorporate things that have already gone outside of this new plan, which is supposed to be the plan for the next few decades, which is just a really interesting thing. And yeah, to me, as someone who lives in the neighborhood, but even just watching the process, and a couple of the councillors spoke to this, let's wait a few weeks. Let's wait a month or two to see what Plan Whyte says, which had a lot of public consultation behind it and a lot of research. And then we'll make the decision on whether or not, in this case, Southpark fits. But they kind of just went ahead with it.
Well, and one of the things they mentioned a few times was that Plan Whyte was going to be developed in tandem with these approvals and these developments, and these developments would be used to inform Plan Whyte. So council's decision would inform, as you saw in the different colors where the Southpark is. But it seems sort of like, again, we'll get what we want by changing the rules to support what we want. But if there is Plan Whyte, and if we're not looking at the ARPs, and if we're not following our developed plans, what is the point of doing those plans at all?
Well, and the interesting thing about sort of the Mezzo happening last year, which is a 16-story development just off of Whyte, and now the Southpark just across 106th from it, is, and the question would have to be, looking at this, from a process standpoint, journalistically, does administration, which said, the Mezzo doesn't quite fit, but council approved it. Okay, well, did they change their position now to say, well, we're just going to go with what council has done? So, okay, we sort of like Southpark now because it seems to fit most of the things that we look at as a city, but also seems to fit what you guys are looking for in Whyte Avenue, and so we're not against it. So there's an interesting position there that could be happening, right, where you kind of have to go with what council seems to be doing in some directions if you're administration, and you can still try and fight for better design and different zoning, but at the same time, you can't be against everything. So is there a pivot there where now the rules do kind of get thrown out or changed?
Yeah, I don't know. I find the whole thing very confusing. And then I have to preface with saying that I'm the development director for Alberta Ave, and I'm not representing the community league here, just myself. But I find the whole issue just bizarre because we would move mountains for any investment from any developer that was even an eighth of this scale. So like if they want to go 20, if they came to me and said 20 stories on 111 Avenue, I would be with bells on. Like we would support it wholeheartedly with full-throated gusto anywhere along 118, anywhere along 111, anywhere near the stadium. So when I hear the opposition from Whyte Ave, it just seems like the most bizarre thing. They're turning away, like I don't know what this tower is worth, but like a considerable investment, millions and millions of dollars. Like that we're screaming, like we are screaming bloody murder to get investment in our community, and we can't get it. But yet when I see like downtown or Oliver or Strathcona pushing them out, I completely don't understand it. Like, why wouldn't you want investment? Like, we want it so bad.
One thing is they don't want that specific type of investment. I guarantee you, if Southpark went up and the entire building was, 3-bedroom apartments, you would have seen a lot less opposition for the plan.
Yeah.
Whyte Ave is full of 1-bedroom apartments and university students and young professionals and no families. And no families is a stretch, but there's a blight of new families moving in. And we all know what happens when new families don't move into a neighborhood. 20 years later, that neighborhood is on the decline. And so you could say it's forward thinking to reject this development because it doesn't have new families.
Well, that was the interesting thing with the Mezzo, and you see this. I'm paying attention to all the stories a little bit more now, and you see those kinds of arguments do get made. The Mezzo, the Queen Alex Community League, the Strathcona Community League were on administration's side and said this doesn't quite fit. And the big argument, yes, the height argument was in there, but the big argument was the Mezzo is mostly 1-bedrooms, right? So it's not going to help a neighborhood which is already full of 1-bedrooms and has 2 or 3 other newer buildings just going up at the time full of 1-bedrooms. That's not going to bring a mix of density, right? It's going to bring density, so council gets to check that box off. Oh, we built a lot of units in these old neighborhoods. But if it's all 1-bedrooms, you can't bring in as many couples. You can't bring in as many families, certainly, or even seniors, moving back into the older neighborhoods or downsizing. So, yeah, I think that's where the argument, and I think that's where the argument probably needs to go, because I don't think that this council, the 4-story restriction around Whyte Avenue, I think that one is kind of like, you got no leg to stand on there anymore. That's not the discussion in this city, and I think most people get that. But yeah, the family thing, because even if you put 6 new towers on 118th that were 90% 1-bedrooms, it sounds great day one, but then 5 years later, like Troy was saying, you're trying to get families in because, your school is about to close.
Yeah, we are strongly opposed to 1-bedrooms. I've had, except it plays out a little bit differently in the inner city when you get 1-bedrooms. It's a different sort of tenant. And, it is a constant battle in all corners of the city to get high density family housing. We're stuck in a way where we are because the moratorium gets in the way of helping families out. Likewise, senior centers. These are there's types of housing that we want built that we can't get investment for or we can't get zoning for. And I don't fully understand the entire system. And yeah, why it is everywhere across the city we're having to fight to get 3-bedrooms instead of bachelor suites.
I mean, when you look at it and just, again, paying attention to this stuff and thinking about it journalistically and looking at how councillors vote and the things they say about the infill and the density, I mean, you're looking at the developers who are trying to maximize the land cost, and land and real estate cost is an issue that's maybe more new to Edmonton because of our recent sort of increases there, compared to some cities like Toronto, Vancouver. But when you look at what happens there, you see a lot of 1-bedroom condo buildings going up, and that's what we're starting to see now because you have to maximize that land cost. And building 2, 3, or a 4-bedroom apartment means you're selling or renting fewer units, right? And you have to maximize that. So I'm sure that's part of it. But the question that has to go to councillors who are talking about density and infill is exactly that about families. That if you're not bringing families into the core neighborhoods, well, you're putting more people there, but you're kind of hollowing it out in a different way, right? So yes, you're bringing some people into these neighborhoods, but you're not going to bring enough people in to keep schools and daycares and family-oriented businesses open. And so you're going to end up having a whole different discussion in 10 or 20 years of trying to get schools rebuilt in these neighborhoods because they got closed by the school board, which isn't completely on the same page as you every time. But now you're trying to build it, and that's going to be more expensive to build a whole new school.
Yeah, and the interesting part about this is, and it comes back to your comments earlier about administration recognizing the new normal based on council's direction. The mezzo was set as the approval because of its design, and it was told we want narrow towers on Whyte to reduce shadows and everything. And the Southpark development, it was wide. It makes one wonder what the next 20 years are going to look like if we're constantly going to get these small breaches of the zoning and small grievances granted until eventually Whyte looks completely different, irrelevant of the ARP. And I think that's the thing that we'll have to watch closely on this, and it's going to be what frames this conversation for the next 15, 20 years. That being said, you guys have been a great panel, and as it is on Basket of YEGs, we like to end with a little fun. It's going to be a game called Top of the Mootart. Now, if anyone has listened before, they'll know how you play. It's a lot like Pyramid or Taboo. So I'll hand you the tablet, and there'll be words on the screen. Now, your goal is to get your partner to say that word without saying that word yourself. You'll have 60 seconds to get 5 words, and we've got 2 rounds for both of you. Who'd like to go first? Jeff?
Sure.
All right, so when you're ready, go ahead and click that first round. The timer will start. You can click pass to skip the word and come back to it later.
Okay. Here we go. People fighting all the time.
White Ave.
Education minister.
David Egan.
He's going for the same word.
This is security.
Security, same word. Are we talking Catholic School Board?
There you go. Yeah. Okay. River Valley. Access.
The funicular.
There you go. Hey. Funicular. That's a good one. Oh, am I supposed to keep going?
Yeah.
And we're going to put the fun back in funicular.
Restaurant. Angry. Twitter. Gravy District.
That's the Burger Baron. Yeah, I do live in the Gravy District, so.
Oh, come on. Canada Celebration.
150.
I don't know how to say this one. No, we're out of time. It was sesquicentennial.
That's a long word.
All right, well, there you go. So you missed 2. You got 3 out of 5. That's a good. So, Adam, It's your turn. You can go ahead. You click next round, and on that next screen, you'll click second round. And when you're ready, and...
Oh, okay. So I click second round. Here we go. It is the best neighborhood in all of Edmonton.
Strathcona.
It's where you would find the shuttered Avenue Theatre and the...
Oh, Albert Avenue.
Yes, of course. He sold out the not Rexall place, the new one.
Garth Brooks.
Yes, he sure did. It is the worst development scheme in all of Edmonton, somehow worse than Blatchford. They couldn't have possibly screwed it up anymore.
The Quarters?
It is.
Hey! Oh, R.I.P. Quarters.
When you're trapped and you're trapped with all of your friends, and for some reason you paid money to be locked up like this. I don't know why you decided to do this on a Friday night.
Room?
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is a big pipeline that Donald Trump approved.
Keystone?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, there you go. You got all 5. Hey. Good work. So that'll wrap it up. Thanks for coming, both of you. Jeff, you plug your stuff. Let people know where they can find you and what you're doing.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Jeff Samsonow, which is spelled the traditional way. I'm sure Troy will link to this stuff. Edmonton Quotient is my new magazine, or on Twitter at YEG Quotient. And those are probably my most active spots right now.
Adam, do you have anything to plug?
I'm at Yeg Millie, and
don't follow him though. Follow me.
Yeah. It's and you should follow me on Twitter because I like to have fun.
Yeah, Adam and I have been having Twitter follower contests ever since I boasted about having more than him on his birthday, and he is winning at this point.
Yeah, by a pretty wide margin too. So you should add me because I'm way more fun than both of these guys.
Well, thanks for coming out, both of you. It's been great having you, and best of luck. Thanks for making Edmonton good. Not great again. Good.
Thanks.